Let's go ahead and do this. Call today's special meeting of County Council to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Councilwoman Law, did you have a prayer?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let us pray. We have been called together at this time of the year to clear our lives, restore and renew. With problems appear and solutions are elusive, we ask for patience to build towards resolutions. Sometimes the situation seems overshadowing or unimportant. We ask for the strength to use our experience and not be disillusioned, to bring all to the correct end, to restore balance in our lives with new eyes and celebrate what has been done, what we are doing, and what we will do. We ask for your guidance in his name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Roll call, Mr. Smith.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Here.
Mrs. Fatica?
Here.
Dr. Faust?
Here.
Mr. Horton?
Here.
Mr. Leone?
Here.
Mrs. Law?
Here.
Chairman Brenneman?
Here. Hearing of the public. Anyone wish to speak? Seeing none. Moving on, reports of county officials, reports of council members. Any council member wish to give a report? Okay, hearing none. Moving on to new business.
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Faust.
move to make second readings of ordinances number 141, and then 142 and 143 when we get to them.
Second.
Moved by Dr. Faust, seconded by Councilman Horton. Any discussion?
Can I make a?
Dr.
comment?
Faust.
I realize that in the end, these ordinances may only pass by one vote, but to try to avoid all of us having to come in here for a second time later this week, we need 5 votes to move it to a second reading. If we could find one council member to do that and then vote your conscience thereafter, that'd be appreciated, but if not, we can come back again.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Faust. And just so everybody's aware that if we don't have the votes to move it to a second, I will be scheduling a second special meeting. So it's really up to everybody's schedule on how we address that. So any other discussion? Roll call on the motion, Mr. Smith.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fatica?
No.
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Leone?
No.
Mrs. Law?
No.
Chairman Brenneman?
Yes. I believe we only have 4
So
votes.
that motion fails.
Motion fails? Okay, all right, well, then we'll just schedule another meeting then. First reading of ordinance number 141 in title only.
A first reading of ordinance number 141, 2017, repeal of ordinance number 124, 2017.
First reading of ordinance number 140, or
Yeah, we don't need B.
Yeah.
She hasn't vetoed it yet.
142 in title only.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Leone.
before we go to 142, I need some kind of a explanation from the solicitor. Okay, from what I understand right now, the county executive has not vetoed any of these, okay? Now, whoever the member would be that is asking for a repeal of ordinance number 7, and what I'm using is, just as a devil's advocate, if the county executive vetoes that ordinance, okay, which I believe she will, okay, my question is quite simple. The majority no longer becomes the majority. The minority becomes a majority, because if she vetoes that means that the members that voted for that particular issue cannot bring it back based on the fact that there would be an override. There wouldn't be any override of that particular ordinance. And that's, I'm not an attorney, but it seems to me that how would you justify that?
Well, the first problem that you have is
If we could, for those that are on the phone, could we get a microphone down by Tom so he can, I don't know if you guys will hear the speaker or not.
Yeah, I could do this here. Okay, we're talking about ordinance 126, right?
Correct.
Right.
No,
Well, here,
you're
if-
talking, yeah,
Okay.
yes, repeal of ordinance 126.
well, after that is the repeal of that same ordinance. The third item on the agenda is the repeal, okay?
Yeah, you
So,
have, you're talking about I'm talking about the repeal of ordinance 121, or 126. I'm
126, I
sorry.
understand that, but to
Okay.
answer your question, if you go to the next one, there's the repeal of the same ordinance, okay?
Same question that I'm asking you, because that particular ordinance is perhaps the ordinance that the county executive is going to veto. And the other issue that I have with it is, we've already voted that, you know, it is a first reading only of ordinance number 126, which leaves ordinance 120, I'm sorry, the repeal of, I'm sorry, the repeal of ordinance 124. Now, 124 is actually law right now. 124 has been signed in as law, okay? And in ordinance 124, it provides for 7 members on the ECRA board. That's the law. Now, on ordinance 126, you're asking to repeal to make it, what, 5 members on that board?
From 9 to 7.
What is it?
9 to 7, because the current council, the current composition is 7 members, Mr. Leone, and the new ordinance that Mr. Horton mistakenly voted on increased it to 9. And so the question is taking it back down to 7.
Yeah, okay, all right. But what I'm saying is, there are 9 members right now, according to law, which he signed. Now, how can anyone make a new reading or repeal that particular ordinance if there are already 7 members on that?
Well, wait. The ordinance that you proposed increased the number from 7 to 9.
That's correct.
Okay. Now what's on the agenda is a repealer. If council votes in the future to repeal it, it's over, all right?
If council votes to repeal it, it's over, yes, but
And they have the votes.
they need a second reading for that first ordinance.
Correct.
Okay? They don't have a second reading and won't have a second reading unless they have another meeting. And what
Correct.
I'm saying to you is, how can they possibly change the law? Because that's what they're doing by changing ordinance 126. They want to go back to 7 members instead of 9.
Right, they could do that.
Wait a minute, the law says they have 9. They can do it, all right, I'm not saying they can't. But they, as members of the council, voted in a majority for ordinance 124, which gives them 7 members, okay? They, as a majority, cannot bring it back.
They don't have to bring it back,
Well,
all right? They don't have to. If the county executive vetoes the ordinance, they don't have to override it. Because her veto of 126 is consistent with their repealer. It both ends up that it's gone. When she comes back and vetoes 126, 126.
Okay.
They don't have a problem with it because they're repealing it right now. They don't have to override it.
But
And
what
then
I'm-
what's next on the agenda is
But
we're going
what
to do it
I'm
all over.
saying is, they're saying that there will be 5 members or 7 members instead of 9.
Right.
Okay? How can they do that if the law right now that was voted on under ordinance 124 give her 7 members? And they voted, all
wait,
the
the
ones that are here
ordinance-
voted against it.
The ordinance that 124 passed increase the membership on ECRA from 7 to 9. That was the one that you promoted.
That's right.
Okay, all right. So now, if that's the law, I don't know whether she signed it or not.
She did.
Okay, so if that's the law, they want to repeal that, which is why that's on the agenda, to repeal 126. They want to repeal
No,
it.
it's a different one now. You're
Miss-
talking-
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman.
one second, but Mr. Leon, I would point that technically, Mr. Horton did vote in favor of that.
Yes, he did.
So I don't think the one point you're making is necessarily
He
relevant,
can
but,
bring back 124.
yeah,
is what
correct.
you're saying.
But again, I
And then-
don't see any difference between bringing up a repeal with the original ordinance being brought up anyways. I don't.
If I
see the
could,
difference.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
we all
Dr. Faust.
voted in the affirmative of 126, so any one of us could bring it back for reconsideration as a result. There was, I think that, pretty sure that was a 7-0 vote.
What, 126?
6-1.
126.
It was a 6-1 vote, I believe, for,
No, it wasn't.
or which
Well,
one are you talking about?
let's
No,
not,
for
Yeah.
the repeal.
I'll take it back to our
okay,
solicitor,
let's not
Mr. Talerico.
let's not confuse the right of a member to bring some, that you have to wait 6 months, that rule. Let's not confuse that with council's general.
I'm not
Okay.
doing that. I'm
Well-
not. I'm saying that they can bring it back. Now, the person that voted in favor was Mr. Horton, and he can bring back ordinance 124. But
Anybody can bring it back. It's a question of council
I
as a
understand that,
whole.
Tom. I'm not saying they can't bring that ordinance back. What I'm saying is now they want to bring in the repeal of ordinance 126 plus another ordinance. Now, all of these individuals that are saying ordinance 126, either as a repeal or change of that particular ordinance, voted in the affirmative for that ordinance. Now, if the law says there are 7 members, how can they make a change and say, we're going to make it 5 members? They can't. That's what I'm saying as far as, hey, maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I don't
We're not
think
trying to
I
make
understand.
5 members, we want to make it, establish it back at its original 7.
I'll let Mr.
I
Tyler,
voted
yeah.
erroneously.
We voted.
I voted erroneously.
Yeah, we
It
did.
was my intent.
Bring it back.
That I have.
Well, I'm gonna, hold on, I don't want to back and forth here. That's what we could have had a caucus for, but, Mr. Talerico, I'll let you respond to the questions. And I know there's a lot of confusion here. There's numbers and everything's all over the place. It's obvious some folks don't want this to be brought up, and that's fine. But let's stick to the point. The questions are asked. Mr. Talerico, your response to the councilman's question about whether or not these items can be considered on the agenda.
Council has the authority to, they have to have a majority in order to do it, but they could repeal any ordinance that they've passed. And that's what, in order to correct, for council, for the majority to correct itself, they can't simply change votes. I think that they can under certain circumstances, and that Andre would have been able to do that had it not crossed the aisle. However, I still think that since she has not signed the law, signed the ordinance, and has not vetoed it yet, that she probably already knows by now, but as I told Doug, we should tell her that, about what's going on, that council intends to withdraw it, repeal it, the whole bit. With that in mind, though, council has the right, if it made a mistake, council as a whole could have made a mistake in any ordinance. They have the right to bring it back. So, right now, but it has to go through the formal process. So on the agenda now is a repealer of the ordinance that council passed but did not like because it has 9 members instead of 7. So they're coming back to repeal it. That's on the agenda. They're allowed to do that.
And before, well, yeah, and before I recognize the other members, and just, to keep us on order here, I do want to apologize. As chair, I did notice that Mr. Horton did take some time voting on it. I wasn't sure if he was weighing the vote or was mistaken on the vote. It was my obligation to ensure that council members were informed on the vote, so I do want to apologize to Councilman Horton that, because at that time, I think we could be saving us all a matter of headache. And here, just a matter of recourse, I think all members of council regardless of how you feel this should go, should be respectful and cognizant of an intent and desire by any one member of this council. I don't care what matter it was, and it's probably a moot point now, but I think at any point, if somebody had made a mistaken vote on something, I would honestly give them the ability to make that, to rectify that. So,
Which has
but,
been done in the past.
which again, yeah, you're right, Dr. Fausto, has been done. But I think, again, just to keep us on order here, since none of these were moved to a second, and since I have already stated that I will call a special meeting, I do want us, for another one, I do want us to continue on with the order. I don't think there's any, unless there's a new question of our solicitor that hasn't already been asked.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Leon.
I hope you don't misunderstand the fact that I believe Mr. Horton has the right to bring back the ordinance. I didn't say that. What I'm saying is that the other two ordinances, the repeal of 126 and the new ordinance of 126, I don't think it's legal to do that on the basis that those that voted in the majority for those two items are still pending in the county executive's office as far as a veto is concerned. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, and Mr. Tallarico, unless you've got a different response to that, I think you've already answered it.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is an odd situation that we got ourselves in, okay? So there isn't any law on it. There's just an attempt to follow procedure the best that we can and understand what the intent was behind the council rules of procedure laid out in the administrative code. We all know that council acted last week and the county executive has yet to act. So this is an attempt to convince any court of law, if this were to end up in court, that there's no doubt in anybody's mind that county council intended to repeal that ordinance. And I think that this is as close as we could get to council repealing it if there are some questions, because the judge is going to say, well, look, they passed it, they came back the next week, they repealed it, they changed it, they introduced a new ordinance. Clearly, council intended to repeal this thing. There may be an argument that, hey, you repealed it, and she had yet to sign it into law. Well, that argument's out there, but this is the best that we can do as a whole, as a council, and I think that a court would recognize that.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you, Tom. I don't disagree with that. I just feel that, to me, like I said, I believe this is wrong. I believe it's a wrong way to go about it. I'm not opposed, like I said before, to Mr. Horton making a change as far as he wants to. I'm not opposed to that at all. I just think, like I said, those other two ordinances, what happens now if they pass? Does that mean that the county executive has another 14 days to veto that?
That's right. Yes.
Okay, and if she vetoes the other one, she has to do
If
two
she
vetoes
vetoed,
then, right?
well, they're two different,
There would
yes,
be two
that's right.
different vetoes.
right. And that's why I say the item B on here really isn't necessary.
Okay,
Because if she vetoes, then that's consistent with council's repeal.
Unless there's a.
So this all comes down to
Yeah.
her potential repeal of the new ordinance.
okay.
And unless there's a motion on the floor, we're going to continue on with the order of business. So, Mr. Smith, first reading of ordinance number 142, in title only, please.
A first reading of ordinance number 142, 2017, repeal of ordinance number 126, 2017.
First reading of ordinance number 143, in title only.
A first reading of ordinance number 143, 2017, authorizing the organization of the Neighborhood and Infrastructure Revitalization Fund, NERF.
Before we adjourn, I'm going to state that it's my preference that we have a meeting on noon on this Friday. Any other members of council, are you unable to make that meeting?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Leon.
Now I have another question for our solicitor. According to the Home Rule Charter, it requires 72-hour notice to the public. You won't have 72-hour notice as far as the agenda is concerned.
I believe it's- isn't
That'll
it
be,
24?
it'll be next year for the 72 hours.
I think it's in the administrative code.
What's that?
Is that in the administrative code of the home rule?
No, it's in the Home Rule Charter, Article 2, Section 2E.
What does it say?
I said Article 2, Section 2E of the Home Rule Charter, something we can't change.
Yeah, I would have to look at that quickly. There is an emergency ordinance procedure, but I have to look at that.
Mr. Smith happens to have a copy of the Home Rule Charter in front of you.
I thought the chair could call a special meeting within 24 hours.
That was my understanding as well.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Mr. Horton.
while we're waiting, I just want to take this time to apologize to my colleagues for my mistake at the last council meeting. It truly ran contrary to the rest of my votes. Mr. DeManuel sent it back, and I sent it back to him.
It's in the administrative.
Had I caught it then, that we could have rectified that situation. But I do want to differentiate and acknowledge, I do hear what Mr. Leon is saying as well. But those two the first ordinance number 142 and ordinance number 143 are independent of my mistake on its own merit. And I think that's what Mr. Leon may be alluding to.
Okay, well, the Home Rule Charter, the section that Fiore just referred to says at least 72 hours prior to a regular meeting of council, an agenda as prepared by the county clerk shall be made available for public inspection. Okay, that's not a notice of a hearing or the meeting. That's just the preparation of an agenda. So, in special meetings, it may be held at the call of the chairman of council. The chairman shall call a special meeting whenever so requested in writing. So that doesn't apply to it. It's in the administrative code, the notice provision, and I thought it was 48 hours. I know that, but I'd have to look. Doug, why don't you let me have the administrative code? It's probably over your place. I'll be right back.
You could always recess.
Well, actually need another meeting, so you don't want to just recess.
No, for this second, for this moment while we wait for an answer.
Oh, yes.
On the, we're going to stay in recess until we get an answer back on the guidance here for scheduling the next meeting. Excuse me. We're back to order. Mr. Tallarico.
Yeah, special meetings can be called by the chairman. So if you want to call a special meeting, you can do that without an agenda. And the 72-hour agenda requirement is specifically for regular meetings. So you could call it. Now, as far as public notice is concerned, there isn't a provision for public notice under the administrative code or the Home Rule Charter. It exists under the public notice law, and that is 24 hours.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Leon.
Is it the public notice? Is that-
can you tell me how a regular meeting exists? Was this a regular meeting?
Which one, today?
Yes.
No, because it's regular meetings are once a month under the under the chart. At least once a month or every 2 weeks is a regular meeting.
And just those on the phone, Tom had advised that there's no provision that would prevent the chairman from calling a special meeting.
That's correct.
So if I were to call it Thursday at
1 o'clock, 2 o'clock?
1 p.m. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and schedule a special meeting tomorrow at 1 p.m. for second reading for these items.
Mr. Chairman, move to adjourn if there's no other concerns.
I do have one.
Question? Yes, yeah.
Okay, if we have that special meeting on Thursday and things don't turn out the way your plans are, would you then in turn call one for Friday?
I don't
Or
know.
what?
Is that your plan? I'm just saying, if you don't get
I,
what you want.
I don't have a plan that far ahead.
Okay.
Think so. Barring any other motions, we have a motion on the floor right now is to adjourn, and
So
we stand adjourned.